Before I even get started, I know the camera's smudged. I clean it about halfway through.
What is going on YouTube? Bryce Builds It All, your favorite AMP-IA and Part 147 instructor, back with yet another video. And this time I'm going to be showing you how to install a crankshaft main seal on an engine. Now, this is obviously a Bonanza, but this will apply for just about any engine. First things first though, we have to get the propeller off. So let's do that. There you go. So, a couple of things to note just before I get started here. First, you should replace the propeller hardware. At a minimum, the nuts. Maybe you don't want to replace the bolts because the bolts are $185. I do not recommend not replacing the bolts, but you do definitely need to replace the nuts. Now, I say replacing the bolts. This propeller has studs. Those will not get changed until overhaul, but we will replace the nuts on this one. They were back ordered, so they're not in yet. But the purpose of this video is not to show you how to install and remove a propeller. It's to install and remove a crankshaft seal. So the first thing we're gonna do, and I'll go ahead and pull the camera off and show you. The first thing we're gonna do is take these two plates off here, and then I'm gonna drill into the old seal, put a screw in it so that I can pry it out. Okay, so I have these plates out of here. You can see there's a lot of oil coming off of this for some reason. And this is a brand new seal, so I'm not sure why it's leaking out the way it is, but it is. So we're gonna go ahead and get this out. So what I'm gonna do now, and this part is actually probably not the most difficult, but it is tough. I'm gonna get a drill bit and kind of come through one of these crankshaft flange holes for the propeller, and I'm gonna try to drill a hole in it as close as I can to the outside of the seal without damaging the crankshaft or the crankcase. If you damage either one of those, you're gonna cause yourself just more problems. So take your time with this, be really careful. You don't have to use a drill bit. If you can get like a really sharp, like a punch or something, and get it in here from the side, that'll work too. But essentially you're gonna drill a hole in this, and then I'm gonna put a Phillips head sheet metal screw in there, so that way I can get my LAPB in here and pull that out. And I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so now I'm gonna get my LAPB in here and see if I can pull it out. And that is immediately, yeah, barely, kinda. So if you see it, kinda started to pull it out. This one's got a lot of glue on it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a few more of these around it in as many places as I can, and just that way I sort of pull it out as evenly as possible. But what I'm doing is I'm taking my LAPB, or long ass pry bar, and getting it back behind here and pulling on the edge of the screw and sort of working the seal out of the way. Now, it might also help if you push on the seal with just a big screwdriver and break that seal around the edge to help it come out. But like I said, I'm gonna go ahead and try to get a couple more screws in here to get this one out. All right, so now what you want to do after you get this out, there is a spring and like a hard wood thing back in here. I'll see if I can sort of pull the phenolic piece out. It's like a hard piece of plastic. You want to go ahead and snake this out of the way first. Let's get this out. There you go, so there's that out of the way. And then there's also supposed to be a spring in here. Let me see if I can. There we go. Get the spring off of here. So the spring is sort of twisted together right here. And that can be hard to unwind with some metal, so I got a brand new spring in the new one. At this point, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get a big pair of, sheet metal snips, and I'm just gonna cut this out.
Get that done.
Spring, and then I will cut this out of here. And I know this one's leaking, so there's no need to save it. Just, like I said, get a pair of 10 snips, cut it out. The important thing when you're doing this is not to scuff or damage the crankshaft and not to scuff or damage the case, or at least as much as possible. But there you go. There's the old one. Okay, so I didn't bore you with it, but now that I got the old one out and all the sealant cleaned up, I'm gonna start the process of getting the new one in. So first I'll get the spring on, then I'll go ahead and probably get this phenolic wood piece on. So that one's pretty easy. You just do this, get this in here. So now in order to get this on here, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get it nice and wet with oil and then stretch it over the crankshaft using a series of bolts and pry bars. It does help if you heat it up with a heat gun. I don't need to today because it's reasonably warm, but if you're doing this in the middle of winter, I would suggest heating it up with a heat gun and getting a little bit of oil on the inside of this ridge. It will stretch, but you need to take your time and do this very slowly or you will break it. So let's do it. Now you can use bolts, you can use extensions, really whatever works for you. But again, you want to get lots of oil on here, and this is a very, very slow process. So I'm going to start by getting it over these first two bolts and starting to work it over the crankshaft. Now, this time, I'm going to take my LAPB again, and well, let me see here. Put it under here. It helps if you take a rag or something and stick it underneath this so that it doesn't tear up the crankshaft flange, because that's where the propeller O-ring is gonna go. And then you're just gonna slowly pull it out. Go ahead and take this out. Stick it in the next little hole, nice and slow. Nice and slow. There's no rush on this. Give it a second to stretch out as you work your way around. This is the hardest part. This is where it's most likely to tear. Just go nice and slow. Okay. I might be able to get it the rest of the way with my fingers. You hold these. All right. So now what you do, and this is very, very important, you need to walk away for about 30 minutes and just let this crankshaft seal shrink back down to its original dimension. It just went through quite a lot of stretching, so that's exactly what we will do. And I'll show you what it looks like on the back side. Obviously, it's still really stretched out. I got to try to find a way to flip the inside of it, but that's relatively easy. So I'll do that off camera real quick. I'll get everything fixed on the crankshaft where it's supposed to be. Oh look, it just did it all on its own, see? And just let it sit, like I said, just let it sit on the crankshaft for a little while. It will shrink back to its final dimension, and I'll show you here in about 30 minutes or so how I get that spring in place. So while that shrinks, I'm gonna go do something else. All right, so it has been about 30 minutes. So now what you wanna do is you wanna get some isopropyl alcohol, hang on, you're a little fuzzy. Okay, it's been about 30 minutes. So now what you wanna do is you wanna make sure that this is all nice and dry with some isopropyl alcohol, maybe some mineral spirits, whatever you got. You wanna make sure there's no oil. If you have acetone, use acetone. And first thing you wanna do is you wanna work this spring that's in here back in behind the seal. Now the spring is what's actually going to help the seal against the crankshaft. It's kind of what holds it nice and flush on the crankshaft so that oil doesn't leak past the crankshaft. And then you'll do the same thing with this little rubber block, or this little wood block, I should say. You just work it back into the seal. They'll both occupy the same space. It just can be a little difficult to get it in there. I think I put it in here backwards. Let me put this one in first. So now is another difficult part. You need to take some Teledyne Continental gasket maker gabagoo and get it all inside of this flange as much as you can, so that when you push the seal in, it sort of pushes it out of the way. Good news is this actually works by pressure and the two pieces being put together, meaning it will not harden unless there is force on it. It's kind of actually pretty good stuff, I'm not even gonna lie. So I'm just gonna put it on my finger in what they would call a liberal amount, paying particular extra close attention to the crankshaft, or not the crankshaft, the crankcase halves. Okay, then I will put a little bit even on the seal, because why not? Now the nice thing about this particular gasket maker is it won't harden until there's force on it. So you can pretty easily work this crankshaft seal into place without having to worry too much. I like to try to start at the bottom, get the bottoms in first, and then sort of work my way around it until it's all the way in there. So let's see if we can get this thing installed. Okay, so now that I have all of the gabagoo in there and the seal flush down in place, I gotta put these little retaining plates in. You wanna move these as little as possible. It's just as easy as threading the bolts in. The top is adjustable, the bottom is not. So I'll do this one, I'll do the other one. I've got quite an extra amount of sealant in there, just because I want to ensure that the outside of this crankshaft seal is in fact sealed. I think there was a little spot. The reason it was leaking is there was a little spot where they didn't seal it quite properly. So once I get these in here, it should be fixed. It's usually a good idea to let this dry for about a day before you start the engine. You want to let all of that oil, or you want to let all of that sealant get a chance to harden up. And this sealant is actually really cool. It's going to stay really tacky unless there's a lot of pressure on it. So like you can just wipe it off this, but once you put pressure on it, it will start the setup process. So there you go, everybody. That is going to do it for this video. The propeller is not on and torqued. We just got it put up and lifted in place. That way when the new nuts come in, I can just install it by myself and I don't have to have the owner help me with it. But that's gonna do it all for this one. I do hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to add a couple of quick tips here at the end for you. One, you cannot have too much sealant on here. Now I am lying to you. You don't want to get sealant on the crankshaft. You don't want to get sealant down there on where the crankshaft and the seal meet. You want all the sealant around the crankcase and the outside. But I think the reason it was leaking before is because they just didn't have enough sealant in place the first time, and we are hoping this will have solved the issue, because if it didn't, then there's something considerably more major wrong. The chance of getting 2 bad crankshaft seals in a row is pretty low. So at any rate, we got this all on. The next thing I want to say is that when you put that crankshaft seal, when you push it into the crankcase, you want to make sure that it's not sort of pushed out like this. It will affect it wanting to go in. So you're going to have to kind of push it down with your fingernails and make sure that it goes in sort of as all one smooth assembly, because if you put like the bottom in first and then try to slide the top into place, the little wood piece or the fiber piece that's in there is going to come out, and then it's not going to seat all the way, and you'll be pushing on it and it just won't seat. You'll end up having to pull it back out and redo all the sealant again, which is actually what just happened, but I didn't show you guys that. So I hope you found this helpful. If you ever have to change a crankshaft main seal, it's kind of really the same whether you're doing it on a a Lycoming, a Continental, a Franklin. It doesn't matter. They all get changed the same way. You even do it the same way on your car, minus the part of having to stretch it over the propeller flange. So I hope you found this enjoyable. At the very minimum, I hope you found it informative and helpful. As always, leave us a like, leave us a comment. Don't forget to subscribe. Go build something and be easy.